whatever you believe about which side is good or bad, it is way more complicated than any of us can actually understand.
Most people in the government aren't bad. They're just good, hardworking people, but it's just bureaucratic beast that gets out of control that you can't really stop. And I think a lot of that is what plays out in our foreign aid policy, which is just not well thought out, and it's gotten out of control and no one's tapping the brakes to stop it.
He's like, personally, like, I don't want to die for Russia or Ukraine, but being a Ukrainian with a passport and living in Russia with a Russian and Ukrainian passport, he's like, I was going to die for one or the other cause. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. My name's Austin Bronner, and this is my co-host, Cody Shirk. And on the Adventure Capitalist Podcast, we talk about a lot of things, but we mostly talk about geopolitics, investing, business, travel, and adventure. And our goal is to send you into the world with more inspiration and more ideas to make more money and have more fun. So welcome to the show, Cody. You've been a traveling man. You've been West Coast Cody once again. How was your trip to San Francisco?
It was good. I have a lot to report on San Francisco. I don't know how deep we'll dive right now, but I will say it was a pleasant surprise compared to the last time I was there a couple years ago. And as most people know, I'm a California native, so I've spent a lot of time in San Francisco over the past several decades. And the past 5 years, pretty rough city on every level you can imagine. And this most recent trip over the past several days, pleasantly surprised. So I think San Francisco is turning around.
I had a similar experience. I was up in San Francisco. I was in San Francisco in September and August, actually, and had a great time. It was one, that's a really great time to be there. The weather was like perfect, but it seemed, like you said, to have really been on the upswing, and a lot of stuff was cleaned up. There's still areas that like just definitely don't want to go to, but we had a great time. And yeah, what was the biggest thing you noticed? Like, so what was first of all, what was the last time you were there? And then what was the biggest thing you noticed that has changed since the last time you were there? Because even though you're a California native, you've been kind of a San Francisco hater.
Yo, yeah. Well, I'm always a San Francisco hater because I'm from the Los Angeles area. So I'm a Lakers fan, a Dodgers fan, and those are like the arch nemesis of, the Warriors.
The Bay.
Yeah. The Giants. So basically, my personal life history is I'm a competitor to San Francisco, so I'm quick to critique it. That said, San Francisco is an amazing city. Anybody who's been there or seen pictures of it, it really is one of those cities when you're there, you're just like, wow, this place is really beautiful.
Spectacular.
And it's also geographically positioned in a way that I believe it will always, always, always be important. Meaning it has one of the world's best natural harbors. Its weather is unbelievable. It's temperate year round. And it just attracts talent. People like to live there. It's got good living weather. And it's it's kind of the gateway to Asia as well. So I'm quick to critique San Francisco, but I also acknowledge that it's a great town. So last time I was there, I was probably 2023, so 2 years ago. And I would say they were coming out of the pandemic, and San Francisco, out of all cities, locked down probably one of the hardest in the US. And there was so many things that culminated at once in San Francisco. Of course, I will point to the politics being one. Two, because the city locked down, so many things just disappeared, like the nightlife, the restaurants.
They were gone.
Yeah. And it wasn't just they shut down and we'll open back up later. These businesses are gone. So a lot of my favorite restaurants never came back. They went out of business. But another thing that was really interesting about San Francisco is that it's one of the cities it's a tech city, right? So a lot of the people that were in offices or out in the streets or doing whatever, they went and worked at home during the pandemic, right? So when they came out of the pandemic, a lot of people just stayed at home. So there's been a real shift in that city that's probably more palpable than most cities. And so this
foot traffic was way down. Even when I was back there, like in the downtown area, I was just like, this is, even though it feels relatively nice, felt deserted.
Yeah, and I would say that, this trip was the most populated I've seen in probably 3 or 4 years, but it's nowhere near, the 2000 whatever 19
Yeah.
and prior street traffic. And I was on Mission. I stayed at a hotel on Mission,
Dude,
and
we stay at the same hotel. Isn't that hilarious?
yeah, it's the one
Completely.
hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Random. Last time I was there, the same hotel.
So yeah, same hotel, and that is one of the main streets in San Francisco. But if you walk kind of inland, like away from the water, almost all of the first floor commercial spaces are empty still. So those
Yeah.
used to be restaurants and cafes and whatever. But as soon as you shut down that type of business, there's just nobody walking there. So I would say that hasn't come back yet. But the streets in general in that area were much cleaner than they were even a couple years ago. And I don't know if that's because of the Xi Jinping visit where Gavin Newsom cleaned up San Francisco for his visit. This was like a year or two ago. Or if that was because of JP Morgan health conference they just had, or if the city's just generally cleaning up. It's probably all of those things, but I do think the city is reversing course.
If I was to put it in order, it would be cities cleaning up, JP Morgan, Xi Jinping, long time ago,
Right.
Well, so I want to dive in and because I haven't really downloaded with you. You had this dinner in San Francisco.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about it. It was an investment dinner.
I hosted a dinner with Swen Lorenz, who's a great friend of mine. Anybody who's never heard of Swen, you can go to his website, undervaluedshares.com. He's a prolific investment writer. We have hosted dinners around the world together, and this was our most recent dinner in San Francisco. So we tend to attract weird investors looking for unique opportunities. So we filled a room of 22 people in this underground bank vault in this restaurant. So it was a great ambiance, cool.
What was the restaurant?
It's called the Barrel Room. It's this
Cool.
wine room, but if you book this room that we got, it's like deep in the depths of this restaurant. And it was great. It was good to reconnect with people from that area that I've known that are my past investors and people that follow my writing that wanted to just come out and talk. And the one thing that's really cool when you meet people in person in the investment world is that typically people open up a lot more in person versus email or on social media. So you really get to understand what people are up to. And one of the big takeaways I had from this trip was that there is still and probably an underestimated amount of wealth in San Francisco. And a large part of that wealth is actually held by younger people. So let's say like 35 and younger. These are the software engineers, I would say middle tier employees of these tech companies, but these guys get stock options. And we had a couple of like mid 20-year-old people at the dinner, and they're rich, like straight up, they're rich. They're multimillionaires, and they rent. They don't have a car. They don't really do anything as it pertains to spending money, and they're ready to invest. So if I was somebody looking to raise capital or just immerse myself in a community where there's a lot of money and a lot of growth still, it's still San Francisco. And I hate to say that. Like I said, I'm a critic of the city, but I got to admit it, there's still a lot of money and potential there.
I mean, it's just spending any time there, looking at like the prices of housing and the prices, like it just reflects the fact that there's so much money in the Bay Area. And it's wild. So I want to dive into some of your takeaways, right? Because I always love to get insight into, okay, you were at this dinner. What was your kind of like, what was your top couple of takeaways, ideas, things that you can share from the dinner?
So I had a lot of things we talked about. I picked three. I'm gonna run them down right now. And one of these ideas I want feedback from the audience on, because I'm very biased on this idea. So the first idea that multiple people brought up is Brazil. And this is something that I've been personally investing in over the past month. I've been kind of slowly picking away at the Brazilian ETF. I just think the country is like ridiculously inexpensive. And when you compare what's going on there economically to the US, you're thinking, oh my gosh, Brazil is just a basket case, and politically they're a basket case. And they kind of are. But there's some interesting companies in the country that are arguably competitive with some tech companies in the US, and they're trading for a fraction of the valuation. One example is Nubank, NU. They're like a fintech company in Latin America. They're big, and their valuation compared to US valuations is a fraction, and their growth is huge. So Brazil was something that several people brought up, and this is from tech people in San Francisco that notice what's going on in Brazil and their valuation. So
what's the ETF?
It's EWZ. And then Nubank, I think it's NU. Someone can check on that.
Cool. So Brazil.
Yeah.
Brazil. What else?
The Brazilian ETF, by the way, I think it has a PE of 8 and it's a yield of 8% too. So it's got some yield. All right, second idea. I love picks and shovels of any industry, and the reason I love picks and shovels is because it's sometimes not an obvious way to approach an industry. I've done this investing in the past. For example, I invested in the psychedelics medicine space, but I went after like data and analytics in that space because I knew that was a part that was lacking. So I spoke to a couple of people about the AI and data center boom. And one of our dinner guests, his name's Mel, giving him a shout out. He's been an investor of mine for almost a decade. He's a great guy. And he said he's working on a company. He's actually on the board where they are working on the foundations for data centers, like literally the foundation, like the concrete foundation. And part of the thesis is that these foundations not only have to be very strong, they have to be very sturdy for seismic activity. So there's these picks and shovels opportunities in the AI and data center play that you don't really think about. Meaning, of course, when you think of a data center, you think of NVIDIA and you think of the computers and the chips, but you don't really think about all the other basic stuff.
Construction.
Yes.
Constructing it. Yeah.
Totally. So if anybody is interested, reach out to me. Mel is on the board of this company. I guess I can say the company. It's called, what is it called here? I wrote it down. Biax USA, BIAXUSA.com. And so that was just interesting because, again, you look at a growth industry, everyone knows data centers are growing, and the obvious play is NVIDIA, but their valuation's out of control. Then you look at other things, and this foundation company is very interesting. So that was the second one. And then the third one, this is the controversial one that I want feedback from listeners on. Rebuilding Ukraine. And the idea there is that there's already several funds in existence that are collecting money right now to rebuild Ukraine. That's everything from infrastructure to real estate to on and on and on. And the general thesis is that there's going to be so much international aid money coming in to reimburse a lot of these funds that there's going to be a huge profit opportunity for investors. So my biased view is that if you're in the US, you want nothing to do with Ukraine right now. The US government has spent so much money on this war. It's almost this topic that nobody even likes to talk about anymore. And the idea of sending more money there as an investor seems not only risky, like your capital is going to get entangled there, but it's just not something you want to get involved with. Could be totally wrong. Maybe there's some investors out there who find this attractive. But there were a couple people at dinner who were really into this idea. So if you are, let me know. I can make some connections there. But me personally, I wasn't too pumped on it. But it was a hot topic that night.
Do you want me to email you?
Yeah, or just I don't know, go to our website, venturecapitalist.com and connect with us there. I don't know. What do you think about the Ukraine idea? I want to get your take. We didn't talk about it.
Well, I think the timing is interesting because right now it's the war is still going on, but all signs point to it, in my opinion, getting settled. Right? Doesn't seem a lot of patience. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of patience for it to continue, and there's going to be a lot of pressure from both sides. You can see like public, Trump doing public tweets about, "Hey, Russia, we want to work with you. Let's make this happen. This is that you're going to get our best deal now, or it's going to get worse." So my belief is it's going to be settled. It's one of my predictions. It's going to be settled actually by the end of February. There'll be some sort of a resolution. Or at least in the first half of the year.
That's like 30 days from right now, right? So you're saying in 4 weeks this war is settled.
I think that there's going to be a lot of progress.
Okay.
And yeah, it'll be close to being settled. I think there's just interest on both sides. I could be totally wrong. This was my prediction months ago, though, when I was kind of predicting what was going to happen over the first 4 years.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right.
I hope I'm right too. I hope I'm right too. But I think the timing is right. I think the challenge with it is, well, to your point, like funds are already doing it, right? So I always try to like weigh in my mind the difference between, all right, there's this risk reward, and it feels like the risk outweighs the reward at this point. because there's a lot of other things that have high risk reward and are liquid, right? You look at like a lot of the stuff. This is why cryptocurrency has been so exciting, because there's lots of risk, lots of reward, but it's highly liquid, so you can get in and get out. Where some of these other ones you're in and you're.
I like to call it a barbed investment. It goes in really easily, and you try and pull it out, ain't coming out. It's stuck in there.
What are the do you have any funds that you know of that people could take a look at?
I'm hesitant to pitch them publicly here, so definitely reach out to me.
Well, no pitching.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't even mention them. I don't even want to mention them just because they're private and blah blah blah. But yeah, reach out to me, at Cody Shirk on Twitter, or on X, I should say, or go to our website at venturecapitalist.com and send smoke signals, and we can get in communication.
Well, back to the San Francisco data center picks and shovels opportunity sort of thing. That's the part that is the most interesting to me. A couple reasons. One, I watched this play out so hard and so profitably in the e-commerce space. That was a space that I was in, have been in for a long time.
So what type of stuff would you say is a picks and shovels thing in e-commerce?
Software. Software, and I've watched e-commerce boom, go back down, boom, go back, just like, and a lot of the people, there's been really the big winners are the email service providers. Like one of the biggest winners is Klaviyo.
Okay.
Well, Klaviyo really is the big one. So Klaviyo, MailChimp as well. MailChimp did well, but MailChimp wasn't focused on e-commerce as much. Klaviyo was like this email for e-commerce company. And of all the winners, it's probably the biggest in the e-commerce space, besides Shopify. So Shopify, Klaviyo, those are all the things that allowed people to sell online. Now, obviously, there are winners in the e-commerce space, people that exited their business selling a product, but reliably, the bigger winners have been on the picks and shovel side of things. And then one of my favorite companies is, which I'm also an investor in, is Postpilot, which is a direct mail company for e-commerce. So they allow e-commerce companies to send postcards, to send little like pamphlets in the mail, all automated. And it's been on. It was one of those that just, my friend Drew runs it. He was like, "Hey, I'm raising some money." I'm like, I'm in, because I see how this supports the industry, and it's one of those things that it's going to continue to grow and ride the ups and the downs, regardless if individual businesses go under, or they struggle. There's always going to be a demand for marketing your e-commerce business, and this company does a great job doing that. So that's kind of like, that's the thing that's most exciting. And then you also take the listening to Peter Thiel talk about what are the differences between this AI boom and some of the other booms that have happened in Silicon Valley. It's just the fact that a lot of these AI companies are going to have to be in person, located in the Valley, is going to lead to more of a boom in the Valley. This is why, like, my kind of bull case for the Bay Area is that as these AI companies continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger, they're not going to be able to distribute the way that some of these other companies did, and there'll be smaller number of individuals making more money located specifically in the Valley. So that's the one that makes me most excited.
And historically, San Francisco is
boomtown.
Well, but also is the picks and shovels town. Literally.
It is.
Meaning, so the California gold rush, mid 1800s, the people who made the most money were the people selling picks and shovels for the miners. And the most famous story is Levi Strauss, who invented jeans that had rivets on the corners of the pockets, and he patented that technology. And Levi Strauss, he's an immigrant from Germany, so total America success story. But he died in the early 1900s, maybe like 1902-3. He died with a net worth of $30 million, which is equivalent to $1 billion today. And so he died a billionaire from selling jeans to the miners. It's the best picks and shovels story and American dream you could possibly think of. And again, going back to AI data centers, like you said, it's very obvious that they're going to need to do all this other business outside of like the hardcore computer chip industry. And whether it's the buildings, the foundations, the whatever it is, there's going to be a lot of money made in the picks and shovels industry of AI and data centers.
So something I learned fairly recently, but my great grandfather was operating in San Francisco at the same time as Levi Strauss, and started a paint company that became one of the largest paint companies in the Bay Area, and actually in the entire West Coast. And he left from the East Coast, went out to San Francisco, set up and built this company called Fuller Paints. And that was, I mean, truly at the time, like, talk about venture capitalists. It's like I'm going out in the 1800s to the West Coast, decided to sell some stuff. He started a little shop, and then it grew and grew and grew. And to your point, it became one of the largest, most profitable companies in that area. And it's been a big inspiration. I only knew that my great grandfather was involved with it. I didn't know that my great grandfather was actually the one who started it. And I just learned there's a book that I just purchased to read about his journey.
Did you get money from that? Did you get some inheritance from that?
A little bit from that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Past all. I mean, very, very little related to that, but yeah, there was like multi-generation. I mean, it's crazy. A really impressive dude who just was like, I'm getting out there and I'm going to make it happen.
Very cool. Well, the last thing I'll say on San Francisco before we go to the next topic is that I was reminded how industrial San Francisco is. And I think people who have never been there don't realize it. It's very industrial, especially South San Francisco. They literally call themselves the industrial city. There's factories and warehouses, and you look across the bay towards Oakland and you just see like machinery and big things. And I think that manufacturing boom that America has definitely lost is very apparent that it used to exist and could possibly come back. And that was a good reminder for me going through the Bay Area. Like, wow, this was something that the U.S. really was proud of. And a lot of it is decaying. I wonder if that will come back. I know that's obviously one of Trump's big initiatives, but it did once exist in the U.S., so it's not impossible that it could come back.
Sounds like you're going to make. You think about making the move back?
California's got to change a lot before I move back, starting with how they tax their citizens and treat them. That needs to be the inverse. Less tax, better treatment. And I will say here in Florida, zero income tax, and the way things work here and the roads are maintained, it's like, how is this possible? Meaning it's so good here compared to the U.S., and it's the inverse. Less taxes, better treatment. California's got to get on with that trend.
Well, I want to transition to one of the biggest things we want to talk about today, which is very, very interesting.
I'm really excited to talk about this topic, by the way.
It's related to, spending less, cutting, not necessarily taxing less, but spending less. It's really USAID and this freeze that's going on. So the USAID, which is the U.S. Agency for International Development, is facing upheaval right now because of a bunch of actions that Trump took in the first few days of this new administration, including a sweeping freeze on foreign aid, administrative leave for a bunch of senior officials, and a 90-day review of all of the foreign assistance program. So in effect, he was just like, we're going to pause this. We're going to take a pause on what we're doing with USAID. And we're going to dive into what this is and why it actually matters.
And what the opportunity is too, by the way. Huge opportunities here we're going to get into.
And the opportunities that come from this. But I kind of want to first dive into what USAID is. And then we'll dive into kind of like what's happening and why and where the money is going, because USAID, it's a very, well, first of all, USAID, right? If you break it down, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So I'm gonna read from their website, and then we'll dive into what's happening. This is from their website. The United States Agency for International Development, USAID, is the U.S. government's agency that leads international development and humanitarian assistance efforts to our partner countries. We work together with individuals, communities, and countries globally to improve everyday lives. USAID's efforts provide humanitarian assistance, reduce poverty, strengthen democratic governance, advance economic opportunities, and help achieve progress beyond programs. Our work benefits people around the world, including those in the U.S. USAID's investments help achieve sustainable development progress, advancing our collective security, health, and prosperity. So sounds really, really, really good and nice. They've got this nice kind of like gloss over what they do. Cody, is that what they do?
No, it's not. And that's what I want to dive into. And just the last thing I wanted to mention on clarifying what USAID is, it receives overall foreign policy guidance from the Secretary of State. And if you're not up on U.S. politics, the Secretary of State is really responsible for outward relations with other countries and leading foreign policy and negotiating different deals. So USAID is supposed to receive somewhat of direction from the U.S. State Department, and the Secretary of State now is Marco Rubio. It was Antony Blinken, and there's a whole other story there. But my point is, it's a new team now. Marco Rubio is leading this thing, and USAID is supposed to receive guidance from him and the Department of State.
And you know, just a quick dive into the other story with Blinken. The Blinken rumors are that Blinken was really the one guiding the Biden administration, right? And if you listen to people who are connected to Washington, who have had kind of a firsthand view on what happened in the Biden administration over the last 4 years, and specifically the last like year, as they were starting to ratchet up pressure on different countries, that he had a outsized impact on the government, and with many people believing that he was actually the one calling a lot of the shots, and that Biden was kind of just a like a partner. One interesting thing that I read before diving into this is that when there was a speech from Biden where he was talking, this was like about a year ago, he was talking about Russia, and he said that, you know, they wanted to effectively pursue regime change. That it was an offhanded comment, and he left that press conference, and it was like, whoa, that's kind of interesting offhand comment that Biden made, and then they immediately rolled it back, and they put out a statement being like, that's not what he means. We don't actually mean that. And then they released that they allowed him to be a partner in the document that was released, not the leader of the document. He was a partner in crafting that message. And so some of the conspiracy is that Blinken was the one behind it. But diving into this, back to USAID and Rubio being the one leading this. I'm going to say one more thing about Blinken. You can, the listeners, you should do this on your own. Do some diving on this. Look who Blinken is related to. It's a crazy story. You're not going to believe it, but there's a direct tie to Epstein. And I'm going to let you discover this on your own for listeners who are curious, but there's a direct tie of Blinken's family to the Epstein whole story. It's wild. It's Blinken to Ghislaine.
Yes.
Ghislaine.
Yeah. Ghislaine.
Ghislaine Maxwell to her father, right?
Yes.
The connection is what's the connection? It's him to is it his?
I mean, it's a long story. I don't know if we want to dive into it here, but basically, Blinken's father was involved in the murder of Ghislaine Maxwell's father, and there's some backdoor reasoning of why he was killed and everything going on. It's, again, a very long, convoluted story that will lead you long down a rabbit hole. But the point is that if you want to talk about the deep state and career politicians and the coincidences of people being related and then somehow ending up in political office and very powerful positions, The Anthony Blinken story, to me, is one of the most suspicious, like unreal stories of how somebody gets to power that happens to be related and directly linked to some very high profile foreign politicians with some crazy, crazy stories that are probably true. And maybe we'll be finding out about them as a lot of these classified documents get declassified in the coming years. But that's off topic. Let's get back to the topic. Okay. So we're going back to USAID. I want to get to the main point that I think is interesting for listeners to know about. So there's this freeze on USAID, and USAID, as you asked me, Austin, like, what is this? It sounds really nice. Oh, the U.S. is giving money out to countries to help them develop, reduce poverty, humanitarian assistance, strengthen democratic governance, blah, 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 blah. But if anybody has read the book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you would know that USAID is actually more of a tool to influence other nations. And how this works is that USAID comes into a country, provides assistance either through money, like literally paying a country off, or by financing a major project like a dam or a power plant or some transportation. And the expectation is, because the US has funded a certain project in a country, that said country will return the relationship with access to natural resources, gold, silver, rare earth metals, gas, oil, boats, or actual labor, inexpensive labor. So the idea is the U.S. comes into a country, invests in this country, and then the U.S. gains access to these resources and labor and whatever is interesting to the U.S. in that country. Now, this has been going on since World War II. In fact, the highest percentage of foreign aid funding was directly after World War II, where the U.S. was investing in other countries to strengthen ties. But anybody who can read between the lines, it's very clear the U.S. was in a very powerful position after World War II, and they capitalized on that opportunity to get other countries, although they were technically sovereign, to be remote satellite states of the U.S. And that's why the U.S. has reigned as the dominant power for the last, since World War II. And that's why the dollar is so powerful. So that's what USAID has been used for. And again, the book, go read it, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, explain specifically how this process has been bastardized and how there has been this really corrupt way of giving money to other countries and getting these favors. I'm using air quotes on favors because it's really like paying off other countries to get these favors in return. Now, it's notable that China has more or less copied this model for the past couple of decades. I would argue that China has been less successful on maintaining strong relationships with other countries, meaning they're not as good at it as the U.S. is. However, China has been more aggressive over the past decade than the U.S. has, which has resulted in many more relationships being catalyzed with China. And that's one of the big concerns that the U.S. has, that China is going around the world copying the U.S. playbook. And that's why they are building ports in Peru and train subway systems in Panama and on and on and on. Okay.
All across Africa.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
So, all right, some more statistics, because this is where we're going to dive into it and let you know what this all means. So USAID was frozen by Trump. He said, stop everything. Now, the scary part for a lot of countries, and we talked about this on last episode, is that the U.S. is giving money to countries for everything from food support to security, etc. So we are doing this thing. We are giving fish to people instead of teaching them how to fish. Very dangerous precedent to get involved in, because we're making countries completely reliable on us, the U.S. If we stop funding, you have all these people that are super vulnerable. Perhaps they are even getting their lifeline of food and water cut off. So that's the bad part of all this. This could cause some serious issues. And frankly, a lot of countries are completely reliant on the U.S. and have stopped trying to be productive in their own economies. They just live off the U.S.'s dole. And so that's one part of this USAID problem that's going on. And so Trump stopped that. The flip side of this is that could possibly stop a lot of issues going on where people, specifically high-end politicians, are usurping a lot of the money coming into certain countries. So, for example, Afghanistan or a lot of these Middle East countries where we are providing USAID is being completely usurped by the upper and rulers and dictators of these countries. So it's good to stop the money flow to a lot of these people. And I'm going to read a list right now for fiscal year 2023 of the top countries that received foreign aid through USAID. And to be clear, this is 2023, 2024 has not come out. The top 10 countries receiving aid from USAID in 2023 were, number 1, Ukraine, obvious. Number 2, Ethiopia. Number 3, Jordan. 4, Democratic Republic of Congo. 5, Somalia. 6, Yemen. 7, Afghanistan. 8, Nigeria. 9, South Sudan. And number 10, Syria. So 10 of these countries, I think anybody would agree, or most people would agree, that most of these countries are in severe turmoil. And the fact that we're funding these countries, on one hand, seems like, great, we're helping these people. On the other hand, there's literally dictators ruling these countries. So it's pretty clear where a lot of this funding is going.
The biggest thing that stands out to me on that list is that they're all really stable, non-corrupt countries where there's a lot of transparency in how the money is gonna flow from us to the people.
Yep. Yeah. In Yemen, I know that women's rights and the entrepreneurial spirit is strong there because the government empowers people so strongly. Yes.
But, so I'll share a couple more stats too. They're quite interesting. So between 1946 and 2024, over $1 trillion or 30% of the U.S. foreign aid has gone to 5 countries. Israel, $300 billion. Egypt, almost $200 billion. South Vietnam, almost $200 billion. Afghanistan, $168 billion. And South Korea. They've given out over $3.8 trillion in foreign aid since the end of World War II. And the U.S. is the largest single donor of aid globally. In 2023, it dispersed $72 billion in assistance, and 42% of all humanitarian aid tracked by the United Nations in 2024 came from the United States.
Unbelievable. I want to read that statistic again. 42% of all humanitarian aid worldwide tracked by the UN in 2024 came from the United States. That is wild. We're basically, giving away free money we're almost half of the giver of free money around the world and foreign aid. That is, on one hand, sounds like, great, we're doing a great job. But on the other hand, it's like, wow, we're paying a lot of people off for a lot of favors. There's just so much intertwined corruption and strange business going on that this has got to stop, or at least be audited at the very least.
Yeah. I think like the thing that makes me positive on this and excited is, Rubio said every dollar we spend, every program we fund, every policy we pursue must be justified with the answer to 3 simple questions. Does it make America safer? Does it make America stronger? Does it make America more prosperous? Now, when you think about the dollar amount that's being sent abroad, not every dollar is gonna be answer those questions. So we're definitely gonna see some changes. And I want to get into, so where do you see some of the opportunities, or like why should somebody listening care about this, outside of the fact that it seems like we're on a path to spending less, which is good considering the debt that we have.
Right. And I think I don't want to get lost in this. There's a huge opportunity here, which you are getting at. I just want to make sure people understand that where the money is going exactly, we really don't know. And I've seen it firsthand. Austin, you and I saw it in Guyana. It's very, very opaque of how money is flowing to certain ways. Guyana is gonna be probably one of the richest nations in the world per capita, but the U.S. still sends $3 billion a year to Guyana. And that's a very, very small number compared to the other countries that are out there. So anyway, the stoppage of these funds to other countries is going to be a huge opportunity for investors, because first of all, there's going to be services and products and things needed by these countries going forward. How they're going to pay for it, they're going to have to figure that out on the economic side. But there's a strong argument that a lot of the money that was going into these countries was not handled the most efficiently. So if the money stops now, there's still these services and products that are needed. And for entrepreneurs who want to go look at providing these services and products, huge opportunity. We're basically talking about this established trade network that's been like locked down in place since the late 1940s, all of a sudden changing. So with any change, there's opportunity. So that's one opportunity. I think also that a lot of other countries are going to step in to this kind of like power vacuum, where they're going to see opportunity to provide foreign aid or provide investment in countries. So for example, if the US is providing huge investment into some African nation and the US just stops, well, clearly there's going to be other countries that start to provide that aid in order to carry favor with those countries. And the reality is that if the investing country doesn't actually send their people all the time. Sometimes they use a third party to actually facilitate that transaction, the on the ground people that actually carry out the services or import products. And I think that's where a lot of private companies and investors can benefit immensely in this entire situation.
I find it interesting. There's a chart they can put up that shows U.S. foreign aid for 2023, and it breaks it down between economic and military aid. And 88% of it was economic, and then 12% of our foreign aid was military. And Israel and Egypt are the ones that were the biggest receivers of military aid. I find it just interesting because Egypt is no friend of Israel. Israel is no friend of Egypt. They're right next to each other, and we're we're harming both of them. We're helping them both. I don't. Again, it's one of the things I don't know the details of why we're spending so much money and sending so much military aid to Egypt. I can understand Israel, but yeah, why are we doing that?
I think that's the whole point of how this USAID and all foreign aid. By the way, a lot of the statistics we've been sharing is specific to USAID. The statistics you just shared, which is all foreign aid. There's other agencies, although USAID is the most notable one. Of all the foreign aid we do send globally is completely conflicting with itself. And one could argue that, okay, first of all, we just don't know what's going on. We're just wasting money, and we're a ship that's just sinking slowly because we just have lost track of what's going on. Or, and this is part of the economic hitman book and a lot of that type of world, which is the US intentionally destabilizes certain regions of the world by arming both sides. We talked about this with Syria. The US, the Pentagon was arming one side of these rebels, and then the CIA was arming another side, and these people were fighting each other, and the US taxpayer is footing the bill. And, is it because the US government is just so poorly operated and they're not talking to each other and don't realize they're actually wasting money and killing people? Or is it that we have this intentional agenda to create?
Yeah, is it a feature or a bug?
Yeah, exactly. And I would probably say it's both. One thing, my time in the government, I realized that most people in the government aren't bad. They're just good, hardworking people, but it's just bureaucratic, just beast that gets out of control that you can't really stop. And I think a lot of that is what plays out in our foreign aid policy, which is it's just really not well thought out, and it's gotten out of control, and no one's tapping the brakes to stop it. So this pause on USAID right now from the Trump directive, I don't know in the short term what will happen exactly, but this has got to happen. Whether at some point this needs to happen. I don't know if it's an abrupt stop or tapping the brakes, whatever, what Trump's doing, this has to happen. We have to stop doing this. We have to stop sending money to countries where we don't know where the money's going, and the U.S. taxpayer is getting, choked to death. We're gonna fall like the Roman Empire much faster than we already are.
It also, this whole reduction kind of goes back to what you said earlier about the Ukraine rebuilding. It puts in, from my perspective, this is an example of why that might be a more lucrative opportunity now than it was when we were under the previous administration.
Right. And just to clarify that investment opportunity, of course, every fund has a different thesis of how they're going to attack it. But the funds that I was seeing were doing exactly what you said, which is providing this initial aid or initial capital to get things started. And then once the governments and World Bank get involved, there's this refund of that initial development. And that's where the funds would make the money. They would make money on that refund. And assumedly, that refund would be much larger than the capital that they initially invested. But for me as an investor, especially as an investor who has done a lot of international real estate and international private deals, I just know how this could be, which is your money just gets trapped and locked up for a long time. And it's just one of those frustrating illiquid investments where you're like, oh, I'm up 300% on paper. And then they're like, okay, well, show me the money, show me the cash. Where's your bank account? And you're like, well, I don't actually have the money. It's, it's in paper. And you're like, that's exactly why I avoid a lot of these situations now.
My last thing I'll share here that I think is very interesting. So I love, having little conversations with people who've got different insight into the world based on their experience. I had this guy come over to help me with some kind of handyman projects at the house, and I was talking to him, and he's very clearly from Eastern Europe. So we got into it, and I was like, how long have you been here in Oregon? He was like, I just moved here a year ago. And he was like, from Moscow. He was like, but I'm Ukrainian and I have a Russian passport. So I've got a Ukrainian passport, a Russian passport. He's like, I'm Ukrainian by blood, but I've lived in Moscow this is just like the messiness of what's going on over there. He's like, I've lived in Moscow. All my friends are in Moscow. Many of them are Ukrainian. Some of them are Russian. My parents are on the front lines, living in the front lines in Donetsk. And he's like, they've been in this, they've been living on the front lines for the entire war. He's like, I had to leave because it was becoming very clear that I was going to get drafted by one country or the other. And I was like, he's like, personally, like, I don't want to die for Russia or Ukraine, but being a Ukrainian with a passport and living in Russia with a Russian and Ukrainian passport, he's like, I was going to die for one or the other cause. And so I had to get out. And he was like, I had to leave my very good life over there and came over here and has been working and living in Oregon. He's got a job working. He's a very talented dude. And he's like, I'm just waiting this thing out. And my biggest takeaway was just like, whatever you believe about which side is good or bad, it is way more complicated than what any of us can actually understand. And there's so many lines that are drawn. And he's like, at the core, he's like, my family, Ukrainian family with Russian ties, is like, we're kind of both. He's like, we just want it to be over. And at the end of the day, like, we just don't want to die for this war that we really don't care about. And so my biggest takeaway is just like, it continues no matter what you believe. If your opinions are very strongly held, there's just too much for us to understand the reality of what's going on over there.
Life is crazy, and so are other parts of the world. The world's crazy.
World's crazy. Let's bring it back to the U.S., bring it back to your day-to-day life. I want to wrap this up with kind of a call to action for this year. We mentioned this in the podcast before, but I wanted to kind of flesh it out a little bit more and talk about something that I'm doing. And I got this idea from this guy who wrote a book called Micro Adventures. And one of the things I always think about is like, how can I make my day-to-day life more adventurous? Are there things that I can do to create more fun, excitement? And so this idea came up, which is this micro adventure challenge, something that I committed to this year. And I'm bringing it up in the podcast to share it with other people, just because I think that you might want to join, or maybe it inspires you to do something. And so the micro adventure challenge is to really look at your year. We're wrapping up January here, right at the beginning of February. Look at your year and plan out some small micro adventures throughout the year. I'm going to talk about what those look like, give some examples. My goal is to do 10 micro adventures this year. I did one at the beginning of the year where I went to the Olympic Peninsula, just stayed in this yurt overnight in the woods, and then took my son hiking for the day and came back. And it was so fun. It was such a good memory, and it was so short, so easy. Drive up, stay in the yurt overnight, go for a really nice hike together, come back. And what I believe is that these little micro adventures are things that you can commit to. They don't take a lot of time. But when you look back on your year, you look back and be like, wow, I did like a bunch of really cool things this year. And those will be the memories that you have implanted rather than the reality is you can go through a week, do a lot of stuff and not remember anything. So the inspiration came from this guy, his name's Alistair Humphreys, but some of the examples that he's got that I think are really interesting are just something as simple as setting up a tent in the backyard, right? Sleeping outside overnight in the winter when it's super cold. Going on an all day walk, right? There's a great guy that I've been inspired by who does these, like put away your phone and just walk from sunrise to sunset. Pick an area you don't know and you just walk around for the entire day. You don't follow your phone. You just spend an entire day walking. I did this in Japan a couple of years ago. We planned one day when we were in Sapporo, and it was the prompt was wake up and walk around the city, go explore, no phone. If you have any questions, talk to people and get guidance from them on where to go, what to do. I still remember that day, even though it was a couple of years ago, as one of the most fun days, just because of the novelty. And I had a group of friends that we were all in Sapporo, and some of the exciting things that happened that day. One guy just randomly hitchhiked to the coast, talked to somebody, and they're like, "Well, I'm actually going to go to the coast," and he's like, "You want to ride?" And then gave him a ride, and they went to it was like a very fun day. So my call to action is, if this is exciting to you, to put down a number and try to plan some micro adventures for this year. We're going to keep talking about them throughout this year as we do them. Cody, do you have any ones that are exciting for you or things that you think about?
I got some big adventures coming up, but the micro adventures, especially if you have kids, is a little bit, I guess, more approachable, meaning having your kids go out for the night and go camping, it seems a lot easier. I will have like a micro adventure just to make this even more attainable by everybody, is to get a fire pit. I recommend the easiest one is a solo stove. You can just buy one. And I got to tell you, there's something about fire that really brings you back to nature. And the micro adventure I'm talking about is you have to cook your entire dinner over the fire. And it's a fun, messy, kind of back to nature experience. Again, especially if you have kids. But, my kids, that's all they talk about when it's time for dinner. Like, can we do the barbecue again? Or not the barbecue, we do the fire pit again. And then, after the.
So what do you do with it? You have a little grill, or you just, are you just putting hunks of meat on a stick?
Yeah, I mean, I used to camp a lot when I was a kid, and so this is not like, this is really like glamping fire pit, but the solo stoves make it so easy because it burns really clean and it's really easy to start. But they have this little attachment where there's a cast iron grill over the flame, so you can slap whatever you want, steak, vegetables, whatever you want on there. You cook it, and the kids, they have a stick and they get to poke it around and they're having fun. And there's a little bit of danger involved too. So like that's an important part to make them respect the fire and understand the boundaries. And then of course you got to finish up with s'mores. And my daughter last time, I think almost every time, I don't know how this happens, she gets like marshmallows in her hair. She's flicking around the marshmallows, and I gotta it's a huge cleanup and mess, but that's what the kids love. And frankly, like I love it too. It's kind of one of those things where there, as a parent, it's very difficult to bond with your kids over an activity where everybody's engaged. Usually it's the kids that really like something. The parents are just like, okay, I'm just going to go through this. Or the kids are really bored and the parents want to do something. But the fire pit is this uniting event and activity. So I would just say that that's an easy way to get into this micro adventure trend. Get yourself a fire pit. And they have tiny ones too. Like they have tiny ones that can sit on top of your like a bench or your like picnic table outside. So no excuses. Get some fire going.
That's good. It's good. Yeah, I'd love to hear if you're excited about this or you have ones that you have done successfully. Hit us up on Twitter. That would be the best the best way. Just, I would love to just, share what have you done? What have you done? What are the things that have been fun? Because right now I'm planning them, and it's nice if somebody else has done something really fun, you can just take that example and go execute it wherever you are. And just like it was so easy to go rent a small little tiny house and then go and hike. I highly recommend it. So that's the call to action for the day and for the year. We'll keep talking about it throughout this year. Thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you on the next episode, and hit us up on Twitter. And if you're interested in the Ukraine investments, go to venturecapitalist.com, send us an email.